Hey, everybody. Welcome to Autism Awakening, the podcast that helps you help your child with autism. My name is Dr. Skowron, and I've been an autism biomedical doctor for 21 years. And our podcast is here to help you guys as parents or grandparents or teachers or professionals to give you guys ideas on how you can help your child on the autism spectrum. Today, we've got a live speaker, and I am super excited to introduce Giustra-Kozek. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay. And Jen and I have known each other for years and years, if not a decade. And Jen, I'm not going to be able to remember your entire bio, but let me say this from personal experience. She's got a son on the spectrum, and she has dedicated so much energy and time into doing things and learning and researching to help him. And she's been able to translate that into taking everything that she's learned and helping you guys as parents. So you've got a couple books out. I was so excited to write the foreword for your first book.
Yeah.
We saw each other at the autism conference out in Texas in February. So Jen is great because she's done the research. She's used these things with her own son. And so that's why I wanted to have you on, is to share those stories with our listeners, because I could talk all day long every week till I'm blue in the face, as I do, but they want to know from you. They want to ask questions from you. So we're going to spend the next 20 minutes, kind of hearing, talking to you and sharing your stories. And then after that, we'll have about 20 minutes of questions and answers and go from there.
Great.
So
sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So where would you like to start?
So it's been a long journey. So we started this whole thing when Evan was 5. And I think it was around that time that you actually were one of the practitioners and doctors that saw him at that young age, maybe 6, 7. I don't even know when we started working with you. And you're actually part of the HEAL documentary clip too, in the HEAL documentary, right? So we were able to talk about how neurotransmitters are being affected by our genetics and our epigenetics. And you really helped me really hone in on some of his OCD behavior. So we were able to really dive deep with a few different doctors at that time to really understand what the heck was going on. And I was just amazed at the functional doctors such as yourself that really took the time to really explore the root causes of what was going on and happening with my son. We go to regular doctors, they spend 10 minutes and they tell us oh, here's a medication. So the first naturopath I actually saw really just took the time, spent 2.5 hours with a 5-year-old child. I didn't even think he had that much history to talk about. But there was, and we did a full metabolic workup, which at the time I didn't even understand what that even meant. Right? And I couldn't believe what I was finding in the blood work. And as a psychotherapist myself, I was thinking to myself, why is psychiatry the only branch of medicine that we're never looking at underlying causes? We're never even doing one lab test to try to figure out what is going on with our children, what's going on with ourselves. So I was blown away actually by the first round of blood work, and I couldn't believe how many vials we were taking. The labs, the Quest lab was looking at us like we had 10 heads, because here's a 5-year-old child, right, that needs 30 vials of blood taken over 2 separate visits. So it's been a journey for sure. So Evan started, he was 5 years old. We knew something was wrong. They wanted, of course, the pediatrician now is already talking about medication to deal with OCD, anxiety, ADHD symptoms. I knew he was clearly on the spectrum, but at that time, I couldn't say the A word because it seemed like such a negative word to say. But when I started recognizing this as a medical condition, all of a sudden that stigma sort of lifted for me, and also lifted for all my psychotherapy patients, that I was thinking to myself, gee, could you have a nutritional deficiency causing some of this? Could you have toxicity causing some of this? And so when we started addressing a lot of the underlying conditions that Evan was, having, we actually did some gut testing, right, to find out that he wasn't breaking down fats and proteins. Well, that's a problem. If you're not breaking down fats and proteins, you cannot make neurotransmitters from the amino acids that you're creating, right? So you may have to provide the body with extra. So anyways, so this has been a long journey. We've been at this since he was 5. He's turning 19.
Oh my
I
God.
know.
Are you serious?
He'll be 19 in March. Yes.
Holy cow. I mean, I haven't seen him since I was since we did the filming for the
Uh,
Heel.
oh yeah. I mean, he's remarkable. I mean, he's like the mayor at school. He has, grown out of a lot of his anxiety behaviors and so forth and so on, probably because we just give him tons of supplements and tons of help.
Yeah.
Um, but I'd rather him be on that than on any pharmaceutical that would potentially change his
Right.
wonderful personality.
Yeah.
So he's a happy, well-adjusted, 19-year-old kid looking at colleges. We do have to look at some modifications, and I'm just glad that colleges are starting
Right.
to appreciate kids like him, and if he has some learning deficits, to be able to help him in certain ways. So he did unfortunately still get left with some intellectual disability. Dr. Skowron knows, and I don't know, it's not updated in my book, but we've since, genetics has come a long way. So we have found some more genetic influences that are contributing to this, and makes sense why in some cases kids make a full recovery, and in other cases kids are left with some damage. So unfortunately for Evan, there was a mutation that we found that does affect his intellectual capacity. There are things we can do to help him. Of course, the more we know, the more we can do. We're also doing some neurofeedback with him again, which I think is helping to recreate neural pathways, which happen to be damaged because of the mutation. And interestingly, my husband and I do not have this mutation. So it's something called the de novo mutation, DENOVO, which means that he acquired it early in development. We won't go into why, but basically we can assume that there are some toxicities that we either bring to the table when we conceive a child, and many toxicities that we accumulate during very early stages of our pregnancies and don't recognize that it could potentially cause a mutation, or mutations, I should say. So anyway, so we've discovered even more. My quest to get him to his maximum potential has never waned. And I hear a lot of some parents will say, you're trying to fix him, you're trying to, like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to cure him. Isn't he just like who he is? Of course he is, but I also know that inside of him is locked in a very smart kid who happens to have some deficits, and we can actually help them with lots of the things that we do. So anyway.
Well, that is awesome. And you've just unpacked so much in those few
I
minutes.
know that was a lot in like 5 minutes.
And I don't know which way I want to go down first. I want to talk. You briefly mentioned the neurodiverse community, which I'd love to make a comment on. And we're going to talk about genetics. And we were texting a little bit ago about kind of the chicken and the egg with genetics, and I wanted to talk more about that because I think that's really intriguing on big picture for stuff. But the first thing you said, which we talk about all the time, autism is a medical condition. Yeah. And you just briefly, tip of the iceberg, talked about right. Some of the testing that Evan's had and what you've been able to find. And even personally, why does I know the answer, why does our medical system say, oh, if you're upset or emotional in any way, whether you're anxiety, depressed, angry, OCD, whatever, we're going to give you a psych med for it without doing any testing or understanding of what's going on, even though there's other things that can cause that. Like people who have hypothyroidism, they're depressed. And, yes. You put them on a psych med.
Or anxious.
Right.
And right. That was actually my first questioning of psychiatry. Because I'm a psychotherapist, I worked with psychiatrists mostly in the beginning of my career. And I would ask that very simple question. I didn't know anything about autism. I didn't understand any of what I understand now, because I didn't even have kids yet. But I would ask things like, could they have a thyroid problem? Why aren't we sending them for a thyroid test?
Right.
Just that simple thing, right? Vitamin D deficiency causing depression. I'm like, why aren't we looking for vitamin D levels? All that. So yes, it's very frustrating, and I'm just glad to be working with naturopathic physicians and other functional medicine doctors that will actually look for these things.
Yeah. And again, it's our system has just gone to speed and speed and money. So like you took my protocols, I'm gonna give you a script, and if that doesn't work, I'll write you another script.
Right.
Conventional medicine doesn't have the time to figure things out, which
Right.
is sad. And that's why specialists like myself and other people exist, because some of us still want an answer.
Right. Right. And very often, if pharma is involved, they'll give you a solution like a fish pill or
Right.
something, or but it's very, very, very synthetic.
Yeah.
It can cause more, basically more toxicity in the body. I know it's paid for by insurance, and a lot of people will go that route because, well, my insurance pays for it. But
Yeah.
we need to get away from that too. We need to understand that, like whole food, vitamins, supplements. We need to understand that, like supplements you provide, there are better, healthier, more vetted ones that will actually cross the blood-brain
Yeah.
barrier, ones that will actually get assimilated. And so, yeah, that's so important, because I do see people be like, oh, I take vitamin D. And they show me like they're from CVS
Right.
brand of whatever. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and I understand it could be expensive, but I also understand that when we're doing this, it is so helpful to the human body to actually get the nutrients it needs.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, it's great. So, you've been working, obviously you've been helping Evan for his whole life.
Right.
What over the years, can you give us some examples of challenges that you've had and kind of how you got over those? Because I know so many people listening here or anywhere around the world, they want to hear how you got through those challenges.
Okay. So challenge number one was getting Tim to eat healthy food. Right. We hear that all the time, where, well, my child will starve if I don't give them like the gluten and dairy or whatever is causing the problem in the first place. Because food sensitivities, gut health, all of that obviously is in my book, Healing Without Hurting. You talk about it. Everyone in this world talks about it. But how do we get the kids to do it? I was lucky in that we did start when he was very young. So, I'm his mom. So this is what we're doing. People would say, well, how do you get this slippery elm inside of him to, heal his gut? It tastes disgusting. And I said, well, I get a needle, a syringe, and I tell him to open his mouth, and we chase it with, some kind of like chocolate something. And we just do it because we have to do it. And with the picky eating thing, like people don't realize, like your kid is starving. That's why they're picky eating. That's why, picky eating is so common in our kids. And that's because there's usually an autoimmune issue brewing, and the gut is inflamed. The body doesn't want like broccoli, because broccoli is irritating to the gut lining, if especially when given to them when they have a very swollen gut. And then also if you give them raw vegetables versus cooked vegetables, it's a whole thing. Right. So and they intuitively know that things are bothering them. They like sugar because sugar feeds the bad bacteria in the gut that's happy to get sugar. It's also affects the neurotransmitters. It's also very easy to digest. Like rice is very easy to digest. That's why they like it. So there's so many reasons why kids prefer that type of food. Plus it tastes good, and the marketing companies know that, and they purposely make these foods addictive. So that people want them. So we really need to start when they're as young as possible, giving them whole foods, testing for food sensitivities, because they might be pulling the cheese off their pizza because they're sensitive to gluten, or to dairy, or they may be eating too much of it because they like all the white foods. Right. Once we heal the gut, things get better. Once we improve the nutritional deficiencies, because again, sensory processing disorder is often, there's lots of components to it, but one of the components is mineral deficiency. And so when we get the potassium back up, when we get the, all of that. So we may need to do like liquid things like smoothies. We might have to add supplements to things to get them, to get things better. So, but it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight. Some people say, well, I'll just give them a little gluten. But if gluten is bothering them, that's like basically peeling off the scab every time you're trying to heal it. Yeah. You really need to, and it's not easy, but, so you have to really have a mom mindset, like we're getting you better. Like if you had cancer, like this is what we would be doing to get you better. And we wouldn't be asking any questions. We would just be doing it. Right. So we have to almost treat this the exact same way. Yeah. There's been so many challenges across, like I don't know. Evan has always been a sweet kid, so that's been good. I know a lot of kids suffer with like ODD and other,
Yep.
negative behavior. So it's like easier to give them the screen time than to take it away because they become little monsters when you take it away. They're disrupting the whole family, so it's easier to give them those, devices. And so, it's challenge. I know at times it's very challenging, and it's easier just to give up. It's easier just to just be like, all right, well, the heck with it. Like we're not doing any of this. It could be expensive.
Mhm.
That's another huge challenge parents
Yeah.
have with this, right? The supplements are expensive, the treatments are expensive. As my book though points out, is there's lots of things we can start doing at home.
Mhm.
There are things we can absolutely start implementing.
Mhm.
And then we do things little by little by little, and we take the time to prioritize in our lives what, if we need to do neurofeedback, maybe we need to find a practitioner that does it, with insurance coverage, or, we have to get an extra job to make sure, I mean, it's a
Yeah.
sacrifice. I mean, I think having children on the spectrum is a sacrifice. It's very hard for us. It's not an easy thing. There are days that I've like lost my mind, wanted the aliens to abduct me
Oh yeah.
because I couldn't handle one more minute.
Yep.
We're not talking about my daughter, but my daughter also has PANS, which is autoimmune encephalitis, which is a close cousin to ADHD and autism, and we see it a lot in each other's families.
Mhm.
It's been trying, and a lot of times ODD, there's a component of PANS in there. So it's challenging. I mean, we have to get help for ourselves too. That's another thing I have to throw out there is that like I need to go get a massage. I need to go get my nails done. I need to go to a cranial sacral appointment once in a while and steal one of theirs because otherwise I literally will go and see. So, you know,
I'm
anyway, so
glad I'm glad you brought that
yeah,
up because look, parenting's hard enough. Never mind, hey, I've got one kid on the spectrum. I've got two kids on the spectrum. I've got one with PANS or PANDAS or so many different of these of these kind of psychiatric things in kids are just exponentially growing. So I love that you bring up we have to make sure we take care of ourselves. It's the only way to go through it, or we'll go crazy.
we will. We will. And it's very hard on the relationship between husband, wife, spouses, whatever, partners. It's hard. Um, the whole focus becomes the kids, like where all the extra money that you should have been going on vacation with, like ends up because spending it on whatever we're doing to treat. Like, we have to make sure we are making that time as a family too. Is just sometimes we have to walk away and just go on that vacation and do what we need to do because we need it. We can't. It's just not good.
No, and that's for everything. We've got to make life is like I said, life is stressful and social media and the news try to make it even more stressful for us so that we're scared, but it's yeah, we've got to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that. So,
Yeah, and that includes like going on dates with your significant other, and people say, "Well, I can't because I have this disabled child, and like nobody wants to take care of them because they have ODD or da da da." And I say, I used to go on care.com and I would particularly search out special ed teachers that wanted extra money,
yeah,
speech pathologist. Like we had one that was a speech pathologist. We had one that was a special ed teacher.
yeah,
We had one babysitter that was like working with young childhood development, whatever.
yeah,
One that was actually studying ABA. So I was very selective in my babysitters.
yeah,
Obviously, we don't need babysitters anymore, thank God. But they that does exist. So I mean, we'd have to really like seek that out because those kids, those young 20-something kids that are in college for these things
yeah,
exist. And if that's who we need to hire, they're happy to take the job too because it's like on their resume now,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, just a little advice for those that don't know, what babysitters they should choose.
No, that's good input for sure because again, extended family can get worn down or
Yeah.
grandparents aren't strong enough, just physically able enough to corral a child that might be really, can have flares and can be violent or, damage themselves or things or items, and it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and some of them are up there in age too.
Oh
Like
yeah.
my parents were never young enough to really
Right.
help too
Right.
much. No. So yeah. So I mean, this is challenging, but there is lots of things that we can do one step at a time.
Right.
Like I said, this has been a journey for years. Like we never stop learning. We never stop adding like new things or doing
Yep.
new things. So it's not expected of us to do everything at once.
Yeah.
You know, and it does get extensive and exhausting. Yeah. Agree.
Yeah, just like Diane, one of our listeners,
Yeah,
just put in, it's expensive, it's exhausting, it's a lot.
it is.
What before we get to the genetics, because I want to mention something about that, just from our
Yeah.
conversation before, because you got me thinking.
Yeah.
Um, what now that Evan's 19
Yeah.
and your book is, I don't know how old your book, but what would you put in there now that you didn't put in there your book then, just because you've got this extra half decade? And the
Yeah.
book's
No,
great. I
no,
love it.
that's a really good question. So the
Yeah.
book came out in 2014. It was updated 2018. A lot of people say, well, it's kind of outdated. And I have to say, like, well, first of all, a lot of it's not outdated because a lot of it is from the knowledge of yesterday, right? So our doctors before 1905 or whatever it was, and I have a book from 1896, and a lot of the treatments are in there, right? The doctors, the doctoring that you do, Dr. Skowron, and the ones that the functional medicine doctors are doing is the doctoring that they did before pharma came in.
Right.
Well, right, like looking at the whole systems biology approach to treatment, right? The only difference today is that we have diagnostics. We didn't have them, which makes it richer and better, and we have more info, which helps us then target treatments, right? So that's the benefit of technology. It's the benefit of
Right.
Western medicine. That's probably one of the biggest things they've contributed is the diagnostics piece.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of what's in my book has been written 10,000 times before 1905 to give us all like detox strategies. Like they talk about milk of magnesia, which is basically magnesium, by the way. They talk about bound bowels, like they use terms. They don't say constipation in 1896. They say bound bowels. But basically we're talking about the same thing. They're talking about nightshade vegetables and the inability to detox. They even talk about PANDAS, which is interesting. Now, not as many children had it, but it was a thing. And it was really interesting when I went into the witch trial. Like I went to Salem and I saw like these girls that went crazy and they blamed witches and da-da. I wonder if they didn't have PANDAS. There was like TB and other like infectious diseases that were floating around, and they were
Yeah.
all going crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, God, this looks like PANDAS.
Yeah.
So I mean, you start looking at everything from a completely different lens when
Yeah.
you're doing this. So all this existed, right? We just and the doctors back then, they would treat they would treat certain things medically. They still do that in Europe and a lot of countries like Poland and other places. They still look at it medically, where we totally got away from it. And now we're looking at it as, you know, it's normal to have all these symptoms. It's, you know, here's a medication. And when you have a side effect, here's another one, right? So the book um, could be, you know, looked at as dated, but it's really not. But what I would add, you know, there's a few things. Such as the genetic piece in the book in chapter 8, I believe. I do talk about genetics. I do talk about epigenetics. At that time, like we looked at the big ones like what is the
Kleinfelters.
Felters? Thank you. Klinefelters. We looked at like there was big ones back then, but we know more now. There are geneticists out there. You know, you run a genetic test now. Like there's polymorphisms, and then there's like hardcore genetics
Yeah.
that are changing DNA. So we have more information. So in the book, I say at probably the last chapter, I say, and there's probably other mutations not yet identified.
Oh, sure.
Right. So would the book would that section get bigger now that I know more about Evan? Probably. I would probably be giving, you know, more information about that, but it's really still an area that's growing. And we can it's probably endless. I could probably update it 10 million times and it's going to keep adding mutations. And this special mutation that we found that Evan has is so rare, supposedly rare, right? 150 people in the world have this mutation that I don't have and my husband doesn't have, that it actually comes in fish vertebra, which is very fascinating to me. But if we actually tested every single kid on the spectrum with an intellectual disability, I'm positive, 110% positive, that we would have a subset of children that have this mutation also.
Yep.
And if you read my book and you read the beginning part of my book where I talk about Evan, a lot of parents will say, "Oh my God, that sounds just like my son. That sounds just like my daughter."
Mhm.
They may have that mutation if they look for it.
Right.
Unfortunately, because it is a new mutation in humans, um, there's not a lot of data on it yet. We don't know the particular cause, which I'm sure, maybe somebody will investigate somewhere down the line. You
Yeah,
know,
we'll talk about
what
that in
is
a
that?
story.
Yeah, like what is it? Because there's so many toxins in our world right now that it would be interesting to know what. But at this point, like, does it matter?
Right.
At this point, it's just like, what could we do about it, right?
Exactly. Right.
So yeah, so I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit more about what Evan's mutation does to him, to his body, but um,
Well,
it's
yeah,
fascinating.
if you want to share that, let's do that. But what I want to say first is just kind of to explain for everybody listening about different genetic tests, because there's a lot of stuff online that is misleading, and I just want to make sure people know everything. So, we've got 20,000 plus different genes, okay? And scientists currently have agreed on like 8 or 900 that, if they're not working, can be causing autism or developmental delays. And so when you get genetic testing out there, you want to look for, personally in my practice, I want to look for everything. I want to look at all the genes. So when you purchase genetic testing online without a doctor's order, you're getting a very limited test. So you're getting a test that's probably 100 or 200 genes, not 20,000. So you're going to miss something potentially. And so, I want to make sure, and we're going to be having our podcast next week detail, much more in detail about genetics, but you want to make sure you get full genetic analysis, or just like Jen said, she wouldn't have seen this in her son after doing all this stuff for years and years and years and years. And so now it opens up two things. It opens up understanding for why this happened, and it opens up potential treatments, which is obviously the goal for all of us, because there are treatments for about, in my opinion, about 50% of gene mutations that occur that cause autism. So that's kind of our goal. Now, what I've been thinking about and wanted to talk to you about on the podcast was, when we were texting about Evan, you said, hey, he has a genetic mutation that's brand new in him, that's not inherited, because you and your husband don't have it. So is autism genetic? Is kind of the rhetorical question that you wrote. Is autism genetic or it isn't? And I really think it's this chicken or egg thing, because as I was thinking about it, Evan was born with a genetic mutation that was not inherited. Okay, so it's brand new in him, and that broken gene is definitely causing developmental delays that get diagnosed as autism.
Yeah.
But what made that mutation to begin with? Okay, now there's Darwinism and there's evolution, and mutations create evolution and change. But we're seeing so many more kids with genetic mutations than we did 40 years ago. Okay, so in my opinion, I was listening to a news piece on PFAS, and PFAS are chemical substance like in Teflon and things, and kind of a plastic coating that's not sticky. So it's like the inside of cups, like Starbucks, inside of disposable cups or food containers. They have this plastic lining so it doesn't leak out. All right, which we don't want it to leak out, but that stuff is massively toxic, and it's known to cause birth defects. And what are birth defects? Birth defects are genetic mutations.
Yep.
So is the toxin in the parents creating the gene mutation in the child that causes the autism? Because it's probably not the toxins in the child creating that gene mutation. So it's this whole chicken or egg thing, toxicity genetics, and we've just got to figure out where do we stop the bus and take a look at everything and decide what to do with it.
Right. No, no, exactly. And my book did, I think it's, I don't know, chapter 28 or something. I
Right.
did talk about like what to do before conception, right?
Yeah.
So like I talk about the mother finding out if she has any mutations, so she can address it. Like if she has MTHFR, that's a polymorphism really, but maybe she needs folate. Obviously, everyone should take folate, not folic acid, synthetic garbage. But they should be detoxing themselves. But what I didn't write in the book, which is back to your other question, what would I have added? Dads need to detox themselves too,
Mhm.
right? Didn't think about that. until learning about this mutation and thinking, well, it happened very early in development. It could have been from the sperm. It could have been from the egg. It could have been something that happened right when I got pregnant and didn't realize I was pregnant yet. It could have happened, who knows, right?
Right.
So all we know in this mutation, so this mutation that he has is KAT.
Jen, I'm gonna interrupt you, Jen. You muted yourself by accident. And Jen's gone, everybody. That's okay. We'll just keep going. Hopefully we'll get her back.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
she's back.
Am I back?
I was gonna sing and dance till you came back.
Sorry. Yeah, so it's KATNA-1 is this mutation, this de novo mutation that's only found in fish and probably in a subset of autistic children that they don't even know they have this mutation. And what this mutation does is it actually changes brain structure early in development, which can cause developmental delays. It can cause intellectual disability, because we have a whole subset of kids. Like we always talk about kids on the spectrum, being, super, IQ, really high, social deficits up the yin yang.
Mhm.
Well, Evan's like the opposite autistic child. He has very bad intellectual disability and probably has a better EQ, emotional quotient, than most people in America. So it's right. So every child is different, right? So for him, it was really how it was explained to me was that there's like, if the brain was a super highway, there's cuts in it, preventing synapses from occurring between like parts of the brain, right? So he may learn something and then there's like a spark and nothing happens.
Right.
So what could we do about it, right? So unfortunately, it's not as studied as we'd like, but there's lots of inferences we could make. If the synapses aren't happening, how can we create synapse nerve regeneration, right? Because it's really a nerve thing too, right? So autism is very much affects the nerves. That's why people have, disabilities as far as like gross motor, fine motor, all of that, right? So it's like a nerve problem, right? We know toxicity affects nerves too. So that's a whole thing. Pathogens affect nerves too, right? So we have to look at the whole picture and address it all. But for Evan, like, so we can give him CoQ10, right? And I know you have a really great supplement, Jared, that, that addresses CoQ10 and, metabolic slash methylation slash
Right.
thank you. I'm like, I know it's an M. Mitochondria, which is the energy pack cell of the cell, right? Our energy pack of our cells. So if your mitochondria is a problem, which I think is a problem in most of our kids, PANS included.
Yep.
PANS kids have mitochondrial dysfunction. Autistic children seem to have more metabolic dysfunction. So CoQ10, we're using a lot of different lipids, because that is like the grease that greases the superhighway, right? And helps the synapses. We all know about fish oil, most of us, right? But there are actually enhanced, polylipids that are actually very, very helpful. And
Right.
people with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, right? So it's like, it seems to have a similar presentation.
Right.
And so a lot of the things that we're using functional medicine wise with, like, say, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's are also pretty helpful with autism, as well. So there are things we could do. Is it perfect? No. Neurofeedback we've been doing has been fantastic. And again, maybe we're creating new networks, right? Which, hey, the brain is neuroplastic. There's things we could do. Like, it's not the end of our story. Like, nobody should ever be like, oh, it's genetic, let's just not do anything about it. There's lots of things we can do.
Exactly. That's the message. There's lots of things we can do.
Yeah.
So let's switch over to our live questions. While I'm looking those up, and I got to get my cheaters. What can you give everybody again? Name of your website, the name of your book, which I love, by the way. And I'll start looking into the questions.
Yeah. So the book is Healing Without Hurting. I do have a Facebook page. I don't know where you're streaming from, but it is Healing ADHD and Asperger's Without Hurting on Facebook. My email is healingwithouthurting@gmail. So Healing Without Hurting, if you Google it, you will find me. And yes, and I also helped co-write the book Brain Under Attack, which I did with the Epidemic Answers group. where we wrote a book about PANS and PANDAS and the more natural remedies for kids with that. So that's a whole nother, we can have a whole nother talk about that.
Yeah.
My daughter is now getting a lot of treatment to address a lot of that.
Yeah.
So many things we can do for that too. So that's a whole, and actually on my Facebook page, no, I'm sorry, on my website, there is a 2-hour presentation in my store area. If anyone wants to check out what you could do for PANS, because there's 10,000 things we could do for that as well and try to help. So anyway,
always something we can do.
Always something we can do. So that's the bottom line. Yeah.
Let me get into our live questions. Before I do, I know people are waiting for Spectrum Awakening's coupon of the weekend, which this weekend is Genetics 20. So you can use Genetics 20 for our 20% coupon of the weekend. All right. So questions. We've live shout out to Rodney, live shout out to Colleen and TJ. Diane asks, and again, Jen, some of these questions will be for you, some for me, but I think this one applies to both of us. Doc, is it okay to apply fluoride varnish on my son's teeth? And my opinion is fluoride is toxic, and it has been researched and proven to reduce IQ. So I don't see any reason to use fluoride in any form. What do you think, Joe?
I absolutely agree. It's written all over my kids' paperwork at the dentist, and they're always like, "Do you want fluoride today?" I said, "Can you read can you read the chart?" No, we've found no difference in their teeth. My kids are 18 and 19. They're very healthy teeth. We use mineral toothpaste. It works great. A little baking soda even works better than fluoride toothpaste. And a lot of it's on the inside. If you're not, if you're healthy on the inside, your teeth is healthy. Your teeth is very much a part of that, right? And so, yeah, absolutely no reason to use fluoride ever. And actually, on the tube of toothpaste, it says harmful if swallowed. So
why would I give my child something that's harmful?
Harmful if swallowed. And the World Health Organization has categorized it as a neurotoxin.
Really?
So
Really? That I didn't know. The World Health Organization has categorized fluoride as a neurotoxin.
Yep. But most dentists will still tell you, "What are you talking about?" Yeah.
And that's medical culture. When docs get out of school, they've learned what to do, and that really doesn't change for 40 years. So medicine's an elephant. It's very slow, very slow to change. All right. Maria says, "Hey, my son needs to have dental procedure with anesthesia. I think you've answered the question before about what to do, and I can't remember. Could you please give me some advice?" I get a lot of questions about this in my telemedicine practice. I think one of the bigger concerns that you read about online is the concern about nitrous oxide and those with MTHFR problems. What I would do is talk to the anesthesiologist, or the dentist, whoever's administering it, and say, "Hey, my kid has MTHFR detoxification problems, and I know nitrous, that's the pathway nitrous is detox. What are some other alternatives to make sure my son is safe and doesn't have any side effects from the anesthesia?" So I would put it in their hands and give them the info and say, "I gave you the info." So take it from there.
That's exactly what we did recently. And they came up with something else.
Good.
So
you know what it was? You know what they came up with?
No.
Right.
I probably wrote it down somewhere, but I don't remember what they gave us. But
that's all right.
I think it was like I think it was like a form of propofol. So it's like a faster in and out, and it doesn't go down that path.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I had that in my last procedure. It's pretty common. Lee says, "Good morning. I'm aware that the holidays are to blame for the delay in the treatment plan." Okay, this is a question for our clinic, and I'll pass on that information, Lee. Thank you. TJ, a child born with polydactyly. It was surgically removed the day he was born, and days after jaundice. He turned out to have autism. There's no history of autism in the family. Is there a relationship? So basically, the question is: my child was born with an extra finger, six fingers. Does that have anything to do with autism? My short answer is I don't know. However, is there something genetic that created the sixth finger and is potentially affecting the brain? So I think the answer for you is genetic testing. And again, if you want it through your doc, you ask your doc. If you want it through our website, it's called CMA and WES. That's the test that you want to go for. Jen, have you heard anything about that?
No, I've only known one person actually that has had that, and I would not say she's on the spectrum.
Okay.
So not that that matters, but like again, I'm
Yeah,
sure there's many different influences. So
yeah, exactly. So
right.
it could be coincidental, or that you could have a, something that's similar.
Yeah.
Na says, "Hey doc, we just started Power and Focus. Is there anything we need to avoid eating or supplement that conflict with it?" No, you can take that supplement with anything, except for antidepressants like Prozac and Lexapro, the SSRI category. All right, Kieran says, "Which test is good to check all neurotransmitters?" And Jen, I'd love to know what you've done with Evan for neurotransmitter testing. I would say this: um, local labs do a decent job. It's a urine test. You can also look at blood amino acid levels, which can help. I don't really like the neurotransmitter testing that's done in organic acid tests or O tests. I don't think it's as good as could be performed. But then there are other specialty labs that do more neurotransmitter analysis. But through big box labs, you can check urine for serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and adrenaline, and amino acids will look at things like GABA and glutamate. So, Jen, anything you did with Evan about neurotransmitter analysis?
Yeah, I mean, both my kids have had different neurotransmitter tests, and I agree. There was another test, RFK or RTK or something K, that we use a lab. I mean, there's many different labs
Yeah,
out there. It was through a naturopath, so it's like, okay, I trust that more than
right.
just trying to search it on your own because that there is a lot of tests out there that are not good. That's why I always recommend.
Yeah.
Um, but glutamates, that's a big one.
Mm,
Like my daughter with the PANS, high glutamate, right? We're waiting for her genetic testing to come back now too, because I'd love to know, is there something up with that that's
right.
contributing
Right.
to her high glutamates all the time? Because I mean, it could be chronic Lyme because infections will cause glutamates to rise. She doesn't eat like soy, and like we think of free glutamate, we think about like, you know, all that people things we eat, and people say to me, oh, but we don't eat glutamates,
Mhm,
or glutamine or and glutamine, by the way, could convert to glutamates, so we have to be careful.
mhm.
But it eats up GABA, which is a problem because GABA, it kind of like prevents GABA. So GABA is our feel good amino acid to help us calm down. So it is an excitotoxin. It's there because it's trying to protect the brain, actually, and then it goes on overdrive,
Oh,
just like inflammation. So inflammation also is very neuroprotective, very protective generally, but then it goes crazy
right.
when we have these issues. So yeah, so glutamate's definitely something to look into and make sure that it's on the neurotransmitter testing when you do neurotransmitter tests. That's
Yeah.
just my
You can also get that through like an amino acid test because glutamate's an amino acid, it's protein.
yeah,
So you can get it through that as well as neurotransmitter tests. And I've got to
yeah,
send you our supplement, which I developed to reduce glutamate
mm,
levels. It's called anger management. So I'm going to send
uh,
that to you.
yeah,
But I'm glad you brought up the whole glutamate GABA seesaw. GABA
yes,
and glutamate are both proteins. Glutamate's the
yeah,
accelerator and GABA's the brake. And they actually can turn into each other back and forth like a little
right,
seesaw.
yes,
What guides the body? And so I see a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't want to give GABA or I don't want to give glutamine because it's going to make more glutamate. It's going to make more, acceleration in the brain." And so they avoid that. But I don't think that's the answer because what drives that seesaw is inflammation.
right,
So the more inflammation we have, the more the body makes more
yeah,
glutamate as a warning sign to the brain, something's wrong, you got to fix this. Versus when inflammation's gone and you're calm and relaxed, then there's more GABA, which is anti-anxiety, it's relaxing, it's calming. So it's I don't think it's much that we can control a lot through our diet,
hmm,
but I think more it's a trigger of
yeah,
inflammation or a sign, a sign of inflammation.
absolutely. And I see it a lot in kids with OCD,
Oh yeah.
and I see it a lot with kids with seizure disorders.
Yeah.
Again, which are all intermingled, but like again, you have a seizure disorder, you just get put on, some seizure med, and nobody ever looks to see about the glutamate level.
Right.
So there's definitely ways to bring down glutamates.
Yeah.
So, lots of different
Yeah.
ways
I mean,
naturally.
even yeah, naturally there's plenty of ways like our anger management supplement, but
Yeah,
even
what's in your
pharmaceuticals.
anger management supplement?
So it's a multi-tiered approach. Number one, in order to reduce the glutamate,
Yep,
the supplement has cysteine and glycine.
yep,
Cysteine and glycine are other proteins that will actually pair with glutamate, take glutamate out of the system and convert to glutathione.
nice,
So we're turning this hyperactive chemical into a
yeah,
healing. healing chemicals.
Wow, I like that.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a little bit. And then we also have magnesium, we have
Yeah.
lithium orotate, we have theanine. Those are also going to metabolize adrenaline and get that out of the system, which is very similar to glutamate.
Yeah.
And theanine acts like a blocker or a bouncer in the brain against glutamate,
Yeah.
which is very similar to the pharmaceutical Namenda. Namenda is a pharmaceutical that blocks glutamate's activity in the brain. So some people have prescribed that as well.
Yeah. Well, people don't realize that pharma has just taken nature and created their own synthetic cocktail. We should just go back to the nature.
Yeah,
And if anyone
that's
needs to
where they
get
get
those
their
down,
ideas. Yeah.
and lemon balm and passion flower, really gentle, and both of them will help with anxiety. If it does help with anxiety, it's probably because the glutamates are too
Right.
high.
Exactly.
So but I love your, the whole thing, converting it into glutathione, because that's ultimately what we want to be doing.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
No, it helps when it works a lot. My patients like it, or like, this is amazing. It doesn't work for everybody, but
Right.
when it
Nothing
works,
does.
all right.
Right.
Rita says, "Hey doc, I have a 4-year-old mild autistic son. Just started our new multivitamin. Jen, I'm going to send you that as well. It's been 11 days, but I haven't seen a big difference in speech. He just repeats whatever he sees on TV, but doesn't communicate. He's also aggressive. What else would you suggest?" Well, number one, more time. Boy, if I could give kids language in 11 days, I'd have the Nobel Prize by now. But I would say give it more time. And because of the aggression, a lot of time aggression, and I want you to go back and listen to the other podcasts where we talk about this in depth. Aggressive behaviors, in my opinion, come from pain. And you got to find that pain. Are they teething? Do they have near infection? Or most likely a gut infection? Whether that's candida, yeast, mold, parasite, bacteria, whatever, go after the gut infection. Maybe you need a stool test, which we have on our website, maybe different gut supplements, but go down that road. Jen, any other 2 cents on our kids who do get aggressive? I'm glad Evan's not.
No, I know.
But
I'm so glad. My daughter will get more aggressive than my son when she's in a flare. And I think everything you just said was exactly what, and I think that's a mistake. We don't look for the underlying reason, right? And if you're nonverbal, that's frustrating in itself, right? If you can't get your needs met because you can't communicate it, that's going to be,
yeah,
so is it pain or is it frustration?
right.
And
Right.
so it's hard, but
Yeah,
it will come. Yeah.
yeah. Go down that road. Yeah, I forgot to mention that, hey, and that's obvious frustration. Like, I
Right.
want this, I'm trying to communicate, and now I'm pissed off that, I didn't get to DVR the Super Bowl or whatever.
Yeah.
So
And it's
I
like
get
we need a psychic too, because if there is, say his stomach hurt, like how does he communicate that
right,
necessarily?
right.
Which is hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, all right. Natalia says, any suggestions for a child whom since, and Jen, I want your 2 cents. Any suggestions for a child whom since had the COVID shot and the meningitis shot developed Tourette's and ADHD? I want you to lead off.
All right.
What do
Well, so it's interesting. So I'll talk about my daughter for a second. So
you?
she had COVID. She did not get the shot, but she still had blood clots from natural COVID. Yep.
Ah,
Microclots, not big gross clots
no,
like
no,
big,
no.
but microclots were there. It could also come from Lyme. So we think it wakes up other stealth pathogens, right? Because it's a cytokine storm, right? So whether you get the vaccine or not, I'm noticing it's, you know, we could debate whether or not it's worse, not worse, whatever. But what we have done, which has been life changing for Elena, and I don't know, you'd have to look for practitioners that do it. So we are doing IV ozone therapy, and we are doing something called EBU, which is not cheap. But what EBU does is it ozones the blood. So any pathogen, whatever, it kills it. And then it goes through a machine filter that filters out the spike proteins. But before we do that, and you have to find a practitioner too that will do the whole detox thing before that, because that's like taking out the big guns and hitting yourself over the head. You definitely don't want to start with that. I'll just say that. We did spend like 3 months like doing spike detox protocols to reduce. There's a supplement called Senescence, which they have a whole bundle for spike protein detox. I don't know, Dr. Skowron, if you have spike detox no, okay, not his wheelhouse, but so there are products out there that will, Dr. McCullough has some products that will help with the nano whatever I can never gonna say what the name of that is.
Oh,
Nano,
Nanotype?
okay, Jen, thank you. Pine needle tea, Chinese star anise, all of that. So you want to bind some people are using nicotine patches. You want to bind these spike proteins. You want to get it out of the body, and then you want to help and assist, in that because it is a neurotoxin. COVID is a neurotoxin. The vaccine's a neurotoxin. All of it's a neurotoxin. So the body is overburdened, and we have to reduce the burden. There are some like plasma, there's something called True Dose, which is like a plasma pheresis that actually helps to reset the immune system. So that's another treatment that's being used, but you really have to eliminate, it's like taking out the splinter first. You sort of have to take the splinter out first and then reset the immune system. If we try to do it the other way around, we're not going to be successful. We're going to have a really bad Herx reaction, which is when the body goes crazy and actually produces more inflammation because you have so many things that are rattling around inside. So, again, both my kids run for my money, literally. I'm like, no pun intended, but I'm like, I can't with these two. But it's been very, very successful to do the EBU and the IV ozone. And the ozone, nothing can survive in oxygenated blood. I also recommend reading the book 1 Minute Cure, and that's about food grade hydrogen peroxide, which is hydrogen peroxide, with an extra oxygen molecule. Nothing can survive in oxygen. So some people are very successful even orally, like a drop or two at a time, but I'm not a doctor and I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm just saying read the book and do what you feel like you need to do. But so there's different ways of accessing it, but the IV obviously is going to get right, and you're working with a doctor and you're dealing with the Herx and you're dealing with like side effects from detoxing all of it. But yeah, sorry, I know that was a very long explanation too.
We all learn new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Jasmine, hey Jasmine, she's a regular. Hope Charlie's doing well. Have you listened to the telepathy tapes? Jasmine, email me about that. I'm not. I don't know. So yeah, Jasmine, email me. My child refuses eating meat, fish, and chicken, and some fruits. What can we do for him? And Jen, having your experience here would be great, but I do want to say protein's so important for everybody and not just our kids because the brain runs on protein. Yeah. So, even if it's not animal protein, I'm hoping there's vegetarian protein, nuts, peanut butter, beans, soy, whatever. Because also if you're not eating beef, you are eventually going to become anemic, whether that's iron deficiency or B12 deficiency. B12 is so important for our kids' brains. Yeah. So, Jen, wheels on the ground.
Well, it's probably because it's bothering them and their bodies don't break down fat and protein well. So they intuitively know this. So what we did was we added digestive enzymes, which could be very helpful in helping them break it down. We also want to offer them, like if they won't have a steak because that's just too hard to chew and hamburger meat, disguised in like some pasta or whatever, we do gluten-free, in a hamburger helper sort of thing, get it in them one way or another. It is really, really, really important. But sometimes a digestive enzyme over time, obviously getting them to accept it when their gut's in trouble and they know it and they don't want something that's going to hurt them, which would be normal to do. So I would just recommend just starting very, very small and like asking, just one little tiny piece of the burger, and try with some digestive enzymes and see if we can and address the gut health thing because there's something going on in the gut, most likely when they won't eat things like that.
Yeah, and pair all those recommendations up with an OT that does food training, and food introduction kind of stuff.
Yeah, but it definitely addressed the food sensitivity issue too. If there's a food sensitivity, because I do EMDR for trauma, I do hypnosis, and parents will be like, "Can you hypnotize him to like hamburgers?" And I'm like, "Well, why don't we see if he has a sensitivity to beef first before I'm, overriding his natural, intuition." so yeah, but yes, sometimes you have to then graduate to a trained professional to help. Again, sometimes it's sensory. Is it a sensory problem? Is it a texture problem? And again, is it a mineral deficiency problem? Because then they won't, texture is bothering them. So yes. And someone asked about Bartonella and ozone. Yes, it kills Bartonella. It kills Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, all the things. It can't live, and it just self-destructs. And then the filter of the EBU takes out heavy metal, spike proteins, mold, biofilm. I mean, I have photographs from yesterday's treatment that you could literally see the biofilm in the tube. And that's where it all likes to hide out. And
Sure.
without the biofilm, it can't survive. So anyway, yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I think we got time for one more question. We try to make sure we cap it an hour. Quick question from Jasmine. Wants to know more about methylation. And we could talk about methylation for a long time. So we are going to be doing another podcast specifically on methylation, Jasmine. So just make sure you listen in. Let's see. I want to find a good question. Lee asks if we can give serotonin with citalopram. If that's an SSRI, then no. With the lithium is fine. Let me find a really good one. Quick answer for Medina. Medina says, what can decrease metanephrines? That's our anger management supplement for sure. All right. This one's specific for you. Again, this is from Jasmine. She's a regular. Do you think, Jen, there's anything you can do to prevent PANS and PANDAS in families that already have autism or PANS in their family? My oldest has autism and PANS. We've been working with Charlie. We're very careful with my youngest, who is neurotypical. They're gluten-free, dairy-free, no Tylenol, never had antibiotics. So I think what Jasmine's saying is, hey, I got a kid and we're dealing with this stuff, and I want to prevent it in my other kids.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because we just don't know who's going to be, susceptible to, to create, to getting PANDAS, whatever. I do know that for Elena, it started with an untreated strep infection, that because she didn't present typical strep, she didn't even have a fever. It presented as a stomach bug. I thought she had a stomach bug and ended up that she had strep.
Right.
So that's one of the biggest things, right? COVID, all the, so we really want to treat to the pathogens in the environment, but we don't know who's going to be sensitive and who's going to create is it going to create a perfect storm?
Right.
We're not really talking about vaccines here, but I definitely believe that, the increased toxic load, the increased environmental load of everything, including too many pathogens being given to our children to create antibodies against something. It's viral load. It's
Right.
the container is full. So we want to reduce the container and we want to prevent more things from going in the container. Because when that container is full, that's what's going to spill over. And if you think about it in the bloodstream, if things spill over into the bloodstream, the body goes crazy. It creates an inflammatory storm on purpose because it's trying to eradicate whatever it is. So it's trying to help your body, but it's going crazy. It will cause brain inflammation. So gut health is the most important thing in preventing these things too. We don't spend enough time talking about that. Probiotics alone may not be enough. I would look for a practitioner too that specializes in gut health. Also, peptides are becoming very in vogue now. Elena is on like 4 or 5 peptides. They're unbelievable. I mean, there's ones for inflammation, ones for anxiety, ones for this, ones for that. We couldn't find the right cocktail for her for sleep, and we finally found a peptide that helped with that. And so a gastroenterologist, DO, is helping us with that. So again, seeking out different practitioners that specializes in different things, addressing gut health and really addressing making sure that we're, more is coming out than going in. We want to maximize glutathione synthesis for detox. We want to be able to give the body enough B vitamins for detox. And that again is part of the whole methylation question. And then also, how well can your body detox these things on its own? So it's kind of a complicated situation, and it really just depends on each individual person on how to either prevent it or treat it. So anyway,
There you go.
my long explanation.
I could not say that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are up with time. We ended an hour. Unfortunately, we haven't answered all the questions there that people have typed in. So, Jen, can you give your contact info again if people want to ask you questions, get your book, learn more?
Yeah. So my email address is healingwithouthurting@gmail. So if you have any additional questions, you can message me there. That's probably the best way to reach me. Again, my website is healingwithouthurting.com. And I'm also on Facebook at Healing ADHD and Asperger's Without Hurting. So yeah, definitely all different ways to reach me, and definitely there's a lot to learn. And Healing Without Hurting is a fantastic book. Would definitely recommend. And also Brain Under Attack if you're dealing with PANS and PANDAS.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate you coming on to our podcast here on Facebook and
Yeah.
recording live and answering all these questions. And I highly recommend you guys, if you're interested, reach out, contact her, get her book, go to her website. She's a mom who's been through it. Evan's 19, and she's been on this road for a long time and seen the ups and the downs and the struggles and the heartaches. So she understands you and she sees you. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Again, Spectrum Awakening coupon of the weekend is Genetics 20. Genetics 20 gets 20% off everything, and that expires this Sunday, January 12th. And looking forward to seeing you guys next week on our podcast. We're going to dive even further into genetics and really make sure everybody understands what they need to do to help their kids. So, Jen, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All
Have
right.
a good day, everybody.
Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye.